Hey everyone, it's Braden here for GSHelper.com, and today I'm going to show you how to deselect while dragging. This is a two-parter, so the first video I showed you how to take the connected boxes demo, which is found on our site, and make it so that when you click and drag, it actually selects, instead of the old method where it was just click and select like this. The nice thing about this method that we're using for dragging is you can drag, but you can also click like you normally would. So that's pretty cool. We also made sure that when we were dragging to select, all of the constraints were still valid, so that way we can't select boxes which are non-adjacent. So that's pretty cool. So in this video, again, I'm going to show you how to deselect by pretty much dragging back over the boxes which have already been selected. So I'll try and get through this as fast as possible. Hopefully this video won't go too long, but just hang in there and let's get started. So open up the project that we worked on last time. Again, if you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link for part 1 in the description right now in this video. But go ahead and follow that, open up this project, and we're going to need to create a couple new game attributes, just 2. But they're going to be integer types, and we're going to create 2 integer attributes. The first one we're going to call how many selected, and leave that set to 0 for now. The second one we're going to call deselect, and again set that at 0. Alright, so let's go into our actor, and here are the rules that we used last time. I'm just going to go ahead and shrink this. And I'm going to turn this off for now and just move it out of the way so we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so we're going to have to create one new self attribute, and it's going to be an integer, and we're going to name it ID and leave it to 0 for right now. Okay, so this first rule, if you remember, has to do with when you first touch a box, the first time you touch when you start dragging. And so this pretty much takes care of that. The second rule is when we're continuing to drag, and so we're selecting new boxes after we touched initially on the box. So we could name these. I'm just going to name this one first touch, and the second one second touch. So let's go into the first touch rule, and we're going to add a couple change attributes. So drag the change attribute into the rule, and we're going to change game.howmanySelected to game.howmanySelected plus 1. All we're doing is we're adding 1 to this value so we know how many boxes in total are selected. Next, we're going to drag another change attribute directly beneath this first one, and we're going to say self ID equals game.howmanySelected. So when this increments, it's going to increment to 1, or it's going to add 1 to this game value. Then we're going to set this ID to how many there are in that attribute. So box 1 would be set to 1, box 2 would be set to 2 because there's 2 selected, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and click this first change attribute and hold down Shift on my keyboard and click the second one to select both of them. And then I'm going to press Command C to copy these behaviors, and I'm going to shrink the first touch rule, and I'm going to expand the second touch rule. And I'm just going to click on any behavior and press Command V to paste the change attributes inside this other rule and just move them to the top. Okay, next we're going to create a new rule, and we're going to call this deselect 1, and we're going to say when self used is true, and we're going to add a new condition by pressing the plus on the top right of the rule, and when mouse position is inside, add another condition, and when mouse button is down, and we're going to add one more condition, when attribute, I believe it's self ID equals game how many selected minus 1. Okay, now I'll explain what this does in a minute, but then we're going to add a timer to this rule, and we're going to say after we're going to give it some time to just trigger. And again, you can change these values if you want, play with them after the video tutorial and see what fits best for your game. But I'm just going to say after 0.1 seconds, and I'm going to click the run to completion. We're going to drag a change attribute, and we're going to say game deselect and set that to 1, which in this case it means true. And now we're going to have to change the game selected X and selected Y to our self position X and Y, which I believe we've already done in this rule. And so we can just, again, hold Shift, select these two change attributes, Command C to copy, and we can paste them inside this timer. And so that'll save us time. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to change game selected number to self my number. Okay, so that's deselect 1. Now what this does is it's going to initiate our deselect state. So imagine if we're dragging on the box and we have to tell the game when to start deselecting. So we're dragging on the box, which has already been used. They're kind of grayed out so we know which ones are used. And then we move our mouse back over a block which has already been used. That tells the game to start the deselect. And you can see it's pretty much evident by this condition here. If self ID is game how many selected minus 1. So remember, I guess this would be a good way to show you. I'm just going to add a display text to the top of the logic stack and display self ID. And give it an odd color, maybe like that. And so now you can see that it adds depending on how many boxes we have total. So that condition says when self ID equals how many selected, which is currently 8, minus 1, which would be 7. So when it's 7, right now deselect is true. And so it doesn't always have to be 7, of course. It could be total is 13, so when mouse position is inside, how many selected minus 1, which would be 12, right now, it would start the deselect. That's all it's doing. Okay, so we've completed our deselect 1 rule, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize it and create another rule, and we're going to call it deselect 2. Alright, and we're going to create a couple conditions here. We're going to say when game deselect equals 1, and when attribute self ID equals game.howmanySelected. We're going to add a timer after 0.005. I want this to be pretty quick, but I want it to make sure that everything triggers here, so you can make this longer, or you don't even have to have a timer. It's up to you. And so once we have our timer in there, I'm going to add a change attribute, and we're going to go self used to false. Next, we'll add another change attribute and say self ID to 0. That's pretty much resetting our ID. Add another change attribute, and we're going to say game how many selected to game how many selected minus 1, because we're deselecting a box, so we have to subtract 1 from that value. And then we're going to change game.deselect to 0. So that way we can continue to deselect if necessary. So remember that the first deselect will initiate the deselect when the mouse position is inside the box that has the value how many selected minus 1. Which would be, so say we have 8 selected, when our mouse position is inside the box that has the ID value of 7, it would initiate. And this rule says when game.deselect equals 1, or when it's true, and when self ID equals how many selected, which is 8, so our mouse is inside 7, 8, which is greater than 7, would deselect, so it's no longer selected. And so that gives us our deselect formula and mechanic. So let's go ahead and preview it. And you can go and select everything, and once we start to deselect, you'll notice that the IDs turn back to 0, which means that they're not selected. It can get a little confusing. They are deselecting, but the color isn't changing, and so I mean it's working, but we'll go ahead and change that really quick. We can say when ID equals 0, change attribute self color alpha to 1. Okay, so now we should be able to see when we select and move our mouse back, the actors that are deselected will return to fully visible, giving the illusion that they're deselected. So this is a really good way to make a simple deselect. I'm sure there are other ways to do this, to use some kind of mathematical formula to achieve this, but this works pretty well for this scenario. So that's about it. I hope you guys have liked this mini-series, this two-parter. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know about future tutorials. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we will see you in the next video.